Chapter 4. Completed.
It's certainly one of the most criticized by his detractors, we are not going to deny. That caused great damage, but we have to understand all that was at stake during battle. Arian's life. Author, Salmaron Priestess. They spent some time studying what would be the ideal place to hold the great battle. In the end they decided that the best thing for their interests would be to fight on the Hill of Order, a mountain that dominated the plains of the interior of Demember, easy to observe from afar and in case of defeat would allow them a quick escape. With just enough margin to be able to organize resistance in the strongholds of the kingdom, although they knew that if they fell on the Hill of Burning it would only be a matter of time before the kingdom of Demember succumbed to the clutches of the Alliance. The most complicated part of the plan is that they had to provoke the Alliance, so they were not at all cautious and camped on the hill with all the army that the League and the kingdom of Demember were capable of mustering. They made it appear that they were planning an offensive on the northern border of Olbiana, a coup that the monarch of the Jewel of the South could not consent. They attacked certain towns in New Olbiana with light cavalry, causing more alarm than damage, but what they wanted was for the Alliance to take seriously the possibility of now being the ones to defend themselves. Not a week after the last attack, when scouts from the south reported that a large column was approaching, the Alliance had accepted the challenge, moving their huge and powerful army before them. Despite the fears, the Alliance could not prolong the war for much either. They knew they had numerical superiority and agreed to put aside their individual desires to focus on the final victory. This was demonstrated by the fact that for the first time Queen Lantania of Olbiana, the king of the dwarfs broke Black Gem, the king of Scythia, Tabe, from the Fourth Iron War nicknamed the Traitor, and General Adrian had met in person, apart from all the mercenaries they had hired and who had been mainly used as reinforcements for the weak army of Scythia. However, some companies had been used for missions in the rear, a decision that had angered them, since a mercenary from Almera always wanted to fight on the front line. The reality is that except in Scythia, mercenaries were frowned upon. Olbiana's generals despised them, they did not want to share the booty and fame with them, while the dwarfs who no longer willingly accepted the help of Olbiana's soldiers, much less that of the mercenaries. Quite sensibly, the command of the Alliance fell to General Adrian. The general had much more appreciation for mercenary force than the rest of the Alliance. It was money wasted if it was not used. General Adrian was looking above all for a personal triumph that would make him more famous in the Republic, since his plan to wipe out the Palace of Demember was thwarted by the arrival of the army of the League. Now he was looking for a great victory for his personal glory. So seeing the League's army stand on the Hill of Order, the general had his battle. He convinced the kings of the Alliance that a great decisive battle was the right thing to do, since they had a numerical advantage. Once the League is defeated, it would only be a matter of time before invading all of Demember. To their desperation they were slow to advance, they waited for reinforcements from the dwarfs and Olbiana. At first Adrian was in a very bad mood, but the wait in the end was beneficial to his ego, as even a new manipulator of Republic volunteers arrived. Thanks to his biographer, a weekly serial, Caesala, recounted the exploits of the great general, was published every week. In the end he found himself with a formidable army of 70,000 units that would face at most 35,000 soldiers of the League. An almost certain victory. In the Alliance camp, morale was exultant. With the new reinforcements and the suicidal strategy of the League, the war was about to end, only the procedure of the decisive battle was missing. Such was the climate of victory that the kings were already discussing how to divide among themselves Demember. The central focus of the discord were the very rich red mines. Olbiana wanted his share in the exploitation of the mine, something that the dwarfs in principle were not willing to give up. It was a matter of pride to own those mines. Adrian was also sure of victory. He spent the afternoon before the battle writing the report to the Senate with his personal biographer, stressing above all how his strategy, courage and diplomacy were key in achieving the great victory. During the days leading up to the fight, Adrian noticed the presence of a young knight from Olbiana, named Samra Dustin, a member of Queen Lantiana's personal entourage. The crush was immediate. Adrian used all his influence and seduction with the young woman. As the atmosphere in the camp was almost festive the night before the fight, after dinner, he invited the young warrior to his tent. There they both celebrated the future victory with a night of passion. The general got up totally relaxed. Sex was the best way to start a fight while admiring the beautiful body of the young woman. It was the first time that the general felt something like love for someone. He even wished that he would not intervene in combat, but Samra Dustin, the firstborn of the Dustin house, protector of the queen, she wasn't a coward, she would be in battle protecting her queen. They kissed passionately before saying goodbye and agreed to see each other again in the evening at the victory dinner. While in the League camp, they were confident of victory, although they knew that they were far inferior numerically. During the discussions of the preparation of the battle, they let Aris be the one to carry the weight of the strategy. They would use Orderhill as protection for their right flank. There the troops would be those of the mercenaries of the Blue Phoenix Company together with the archers of Yape. The bulk of the army would occupy the central part of the plain, and on the left flank the cavalry would be placed. Very cleverly they left the riders of the Fambir forest behind the hill. Seeing the enemy's disposition, General Adrian was clear: the cavalry of Scythia and Albiona would take care of the members. If they held the line, it was enough for them. The bulk of the attack in the center would be led by the dwarfs, Albiona, and Scythia. But the capture of the Order Hill would be carried out by his legion and the mercenaries of Almera. They also had special help at the last minute. After tremendous pressure from the Queen, the Council of Mags of Tripulia had granted 100 Magins special permission to fight for the Alliance. If they were placed on the hill, their fireballs would finish off the League troops from the rear. A secret weapon that his rivals were unaware of. In addition, the dwarfs also presented themselves with their most lethal weapons, huge blunderbusses manipulated by two dwarfs who launched a projectile that exploded on impact, generating a large fireball. They were few, not in their 20s, but they were escorted by the first manipulator of the Legion of Danka Attar's brothers, the king's personal guard, and were furious to avenge the death of their brothers in the Battle of the Red Mines. Agnorok was ready with his soldiers. Today they were all together on the hill. Even Arian had come, leaving aside her neutrality as a healer. She had decided to act as a mercenary and be by the side of her companions and her husband. Tanya Blackgem was also with them, but unarmed she would only be a privileged spectator of the battle. He had a strange feeling. On the one hand, he wanted his father's victory. On the other, he knew that in case of victory of the Alliance he would be brought before the king. They would not show mercy for her, or even for being a princess. They would not accept her version and would believe that she had surrendered to her enemies, Adishina in a brother of Danka Attar, for which she would be executed as a traitor. Another disappointment for his family. It was already Adishina to carry the deformation, and now his father and mother would see how he had disappointed the bravest warriors of his kingdom by breaking his oath to die in the Legion of the Chosen. Unlike in the rival camp, here there were no special dinners, no celebrations. Everyone rested in their positions next to their soldiers, got up before dawn to have breakfast and prepare for combat. Aris, Agnorok, and Gosberg watched the sunrise. After an hour the armies formed up to begin the fight. As expected, his left flank would be the one that would suffer the least attack. General Adrian despised the use of cavalry and only used it as support. It was evident that he wanted to be the main hero, and he had reserved for himself the capture of Order Hill. We risk a lot of Aris, if something fails. Aris nodded her head. They had to play the card of mobility, and their better coordination than the Alliance troops was the only thing that would allow them to have some options for victory. King Dasmir too ordered the army to advance to where they had planned, about 50 meters ahead of Burning Hill, and there they planted their line. The Alliance began its advance in two distinct columns. On the left, the dwarfs commanded by their king, and on the right, the troops of Albiona, led by their queen. While the two cavalries on the left flank had already engaged in the fight unrelated to the other war fronts, there the one in command was Princess Nazmarina, who was a skilled horseman. The dwarfs used their fire blunderbusses before entering the radius of the arrows of the Demember archers. And they caused the first casualties in the league, but the front remained firm. 100 meters away, the order to charge was given and the battle began. The dwarfs and Albionna's troops carried all their rage. The league line began to give way to the alliance's thrust, retreating more than 100 yards from Order Hill. It was then that Adrian commanded his legion. The mercenaries of Almera and the Megans attacked the defences of the Order Hill. All the mercenaries had bows and arrows and used them against the attackers, but Arus' plan was very cunning. On the hill were also stationed the famous archers of the kingdom of Uri. Although he did not use them to harass the legionaries, he used them to attack the dwarfs once they advanced on his front, passing by the side of the hill. The accurate arrows caused a large number of casualties, especially in the dwarven blunderbusses, since the brothers of Danka Attar, blinded by rage and revenge, had advanced too far and they had been left unprotected. Nasmarina, seeing the retreat of the central line, ordered the cavalry to retreat, forcing his adversaries to follow it into the battlefield. His riders were positioned behind the central line of the league. Adrian's legion advanced in order towards the hill. The mercenaries of Almera faced each other and the Megans used their elemental spells against the defenders of the hill. They were simple fire or earth spells, since when using weapons they could not learn the most powerful spells, but they caused damage in the enemy positions. Faced with this unexpected action, Kush had to use his famous Fire Dragon spell to disorder the Megans, who had to escape from the flames of fire so as not to be burned to death. But they lost the magician, since as always when he performed the spell he was unconscious. The other two mercenary mags could barely perform spells of protection against the Megans' attacks. Adrian, as a good soldier, ordered the mercenaries to attack from the south while his legion did so from the west side. This had to divide the forces of the defenders of the hill. They were divided into two groups. The first, commanded by Agnorok, Gosberg, Kritus and Sabu, faced the other attacking mercenaries, while Arus along with Deboek, his cousins, and Arian would face the Golden Lion Legion. The mercenaries of the Flaming Sword were the first to climb the side of the hill. They were greeted by a batch of daggers that caused many casualties, but this was an open battle, not an underground fight in a dark mine, and Gosberg, although it was lethal, was not applied with the same forcefulness. The one who did cause countless casualties was the great Denka. Sabu with his double-edged axe sowed terror among the assailants. Kritus hit with his bolts and Agnorok finished off those who nevertheless reached his position. At last he saw how an old acquaintance arrived to meet him. Almazados Quayabraquelos looked at him with bloodshot eyes. "In the end I will repay myself for what you did to me in Almera, you disgusting half-orc." Agnorok was not much of a fighter-talker. He would sometimes mumble something. He even had a hard time shouting orders if he focused too much on the fight. And he advanced on Almazados directly. The clash of the swords was thunderous. Neither of them backed down. But here always lay Agnorok's advantage. He had an incredible ability to turn at the right moment, taking advantage of the opponent's inertia. A slight turn of the waist made Almazados bow slightly. And this was the difference of the half-orc. He was much more effective than before. Perhaps his blows were not as spectacular as a decade ago, but they were more lethal. He slashed the inside of the half-ogre's right knee and screamed inconsolably, putting his knee in the mud and lowering his sword. He had no mercy. After a second the head of the semi-ogre lay on the ground, separated from his body. Arisa couldn't believe it. Her best warrior had died in less than a minute. The mercenaries have a problem. Unlike the regular soldiers, they value their life much more, and when they saw that the casualties they suffered were too many, they began to retreat. While on the central front of the battle, the League was suffering an unmitigated defeat. They could not contain either the dwarfs or the hosts of Albionna despite the harassment of the archers on the dwarven flank. On the other hand, the cavalry of the alliance had realized their position of advantage and had attacked from the rear to the League line, but they seemed to expect that action and resisted the charge of the enemy cavalry. Even so, it was not a position they could hold for long. General Adrian from the center of his legion was savoring victory. Although it seemed that the mercenaries and the Megans were retreating, his legion was advancing mercilessly on the hill. Aris and Deboke could do nothing, as they barely resisted. The legionnaires were not the mercenaries of the sword. When one fell in the vanguard, another legionnaire replaced him. His advance was slow but unstoppable. The situation became desperate. Aris and his cousins were surrounded by mercenaries. If they fell, then Agnorok would fall, they would take the hill and the battle would be lost. As much as Silkai went to the aid of Aris and Loranthas, he went down with his battalion to help the central flank of the front. They were losing the battle. It was the moment that the priestess had agreed with Aris. Arion shook his head. He had no choice but to do so. Everything he had achieved these 10 years was in danger. He closed his eyes asking for forgiveness and then took the blue jewel, put it in his hands, and like that time in the Tower of Tripulia, his body shone completely blue. He rose a few meters above the ground to the amazement of whoever was next to him. Once he was high enough, he opened both eyes, which were a blue hue, and hurled a bolt of lightning at the legion. The explosion was heard throughout the battlefield, and caused that for an instant when the fighting stopped, General Adrian could not believe it. Half of his legion lay on the ground totally dismembered. But the League was not to make concessions. It was the agreed signal. Out of nowhere the terrible wolf riders of the Fambir forest came out on the right flank to attack the ill-fated legionaries. On the eastern front, hidden under ditches were the spearmen of Anthra, who came out of hiding to harass the right flank of the Garter. On the other hand, Nasmarina's cavalry had reorganized and charged the Alliance cavalry that was now between the pikes of the Anthra lancers and the cavalry. Lorantha's troops continued their attack on the dwarven vanguard that was still under pressure from the archers. For the first time the Alliance had to retreat. The legion was totally disorganized. The Fambir horsemen pierced them like butter and headed after sowing chaos to the rear of the Alliance's center line.
Adrian tried to organize his maniples, but it was impossible, and as the mercenaries fled the battle on the western front, Agnorok's battalion was able to help Aris and attacked the legionnaires who did not know what to do. They were coming from all sides. In desperation, he ordered a retreat in spite of himself. That blue woman had changed the course of the battle, but the situation was not there to carry out analysis. He realized that something was massacring his men, breaking the formation, and was heading towards him. He had never seen anything like it. 2 Denkis and a half-orc were the advance guard. His legionnaires fled instead of facing them. At least Adrian had his most loyal soldiers and the standard-bearer. They could do nothing. Despite their brave resistance, in a few minutes they were all lying on the ground, dying. The general was alone. His battered legionnaires fled in terror. The general took his sword and confronted Agnorok. Adrian started the fight, but it didn't last at all. It was impossible. Agnorok seemed to enjoy it. With a sweep he threw the general to the ground, and with a blow he took away his wonderful golden helmet. The general had lost his sword, crawling on the ground, crawling miserably. He tried to flee desperately. Agnorok went towards him without compassion. The sounds of the replication of the swords had stopped long ago. Agnorok grabbed him by the hair, pulling him up. Adrian screamed, but the half-orc showed him something he had in his belt. It was his favorite dagger with his emblem, the golden lion, and that he had left forgotten on the body of one of those bastards imprisoned in the battle of the Palace of Demember. As the dagger was about to hit Adrian's neck, he felt something stop Agnorok. No, Agnorok. It was Arion who held the half-orc. Aris and Deboke were next to him. The kings have surrendered. The battle is over. No more deaths are needed. Agnorok was not about to leave General Adrian alive. It's an Agnorok order, shouted Deboke. It was one thing to leave him alive and another thing not to give him what he deserved. He gave him a tremendous blow with the hilt that left the general unconscious on the ground and with a scar on his face in the shape of a lion forever. Then he threw the dagger to the ground, walked over to where the legion's banner lay to picked it up, and celebrated with the rest of the mercenaries the victory on Burning Hill. On the dragon's bib there is a pact of honor during battles. If the enemy surrenders, the battle ends on the spot. The kings of the dwarfs and Albiona, seeing themselves surrounded by the enemy, lowered their banners. A signal that forced King Dasmir to order the laying down of arms and let the alliance troops retreat without being harassed. In the evening the emissaries of both sides met. The alliance surrendered and accepted its defeat. Later they would negotiate a peace treaty. Now they agreed to bury the dead, treat the wounded and exchange prisoners. While at night, Agnorok observed the battlefield. The next morning, at dawn, they would proceed to bury the dead. Today they were all too tired to do it. The dwarf took a seat next to him. She had watched the whole fight. Despite Aris' grand strategy, if it hadn't been for Arion, Gosberg and Agnorok, the defeat would have been clear. "You fought well." The dwarf congratulated him. "You don't look very sad. Your people have lost." "It is no longer my people. Regardless of who won, I am lost." Agnorok spat on the ground. "We all lost today. Bye." The half-orc smiled bitterly. "Arion has had to fight.